Some things you can't choose in life, like family, your boss, or your neighbors. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 horrifying real neighbors you wouldn't want to live next door to. Number 10. Not so friendly. This story goes, my family and I used to live in a rough neighborhood when I was a kid. One night it was just my mom, my two siblings, and I at home, and my dad was gone on a business trip. Around midnight, someone started knocking on our door. My mom woke up, went to the front door, and asked who it was. No one answered, and this happened multiple times, so she began to worry and grabbed a weapon to protect herself. Then more knocking. My mom begins shouting at whoever it is that she's going to call the cops. At about 2 a.m. the police finally showed up and did a quick search outside of our house while we waited inside. After their search, they told my mom that they had found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door and asked if it belonged to my mom. It didn't, and the cops told her it belonged to whoever was knocking on the door. That they were planning on strangling my mom with the barbed wire when she opened the door to see who was knocking. That morning, as they were searching around the house, they found footprints leading around to the back of the house and up to my bedroom window. They had also found nicks in the window seal where the person was trying to pry it open to break in, but failed. My mom always suspected it was this one neighbor because he would always stare at my mom through his curtains and wasn't very friendly. He also knew when my dad wasn't home. We moved out of that house after that, and all I can say is that was a good choice because that sounds terrifying. Number 9. Wouldn't take no. This user said my neighbor had seen me stumbling to my front door drunk and decided he'd try playing into my obviously altered state. I was young, so I was still unsure how to handle those types of males, and my birthday had just passed, so when he gave me a hug, I assumed it was a nice gesture. Then I tried hurrying off, but he kept trying to come in and have a beer to celebrate more appropriately. He refused to take no for an answer, so I pretended like I didn't have my house keys to hold him off. I walked a little bit off to the side, pretending to call someone who might have my keys, but I really called my cousin, telling him how freaked out I was. He rushed over to get me right away. The neighbor dude was in his 50s and I was 22. He didn't take kindly to my rejection that night and ended up poisoning my dogs later on out of pure pettiness. That sounds so creepy, and why'd you have to take it out on the dog? Number 8. Not a family man. This online user said, I didn't really talk to him, but I'm pretty sure he did something to his wife and daughter. When I met the wife, she was really sweet, but the husband, however, was kinda sketchy. Then one day, the police came knocking. They asked my mom if she knew anything about the neighbors, said that he and the wife supposedly gotten divorced, and asked if we knew the whereabouts of his wife and daughter. We said no, and they told us that apparently the wife ran away and they couldn't track down the daughter. The only thing we knew about the wife was that she had a daughter, was maybe pregnant, and she drove a white Jeep. A couple months later, the husband was cleaning his car and my mom and I were leaving for an appointment when my mom noticed the white Jeep in the garage. If the wife had run off, then wouldn't she have taken the Jeep? The dude saw that my mom had noticed the white Jeep, and a couple days later, he sold it. At one point, we had gotten a package for them delivered to our house, so we went to return it. His house smelled like illegal substances and the deceased, and we saw a weapon on the dining room table. Again, terrifying. Number 7. Stalked. This user had very strange encounters with one of their neighbors. They said, there is this one guy in my neighborhood. We seem to operate on the same schedule since we see each other at the bus stop almost every day. We never talk much, he always just asks me for a cigarette, and I usually give him one. The problem is I don't have a sensible schedule. My classes are at a different time every day and get rescheduled more often than not, and I make my own work hours, so I just come in whenever. Last time I saw him was a couple of hours ago. I'm walking home middle of the night and some guy jumps me from the back saying, do you have a cigarette? I turn around and it's the same guy, just strolling around the neighborhood at 2:30 a.m. looking for someone to lend him a smoke. Now that seriously sounds like a stalker, and I hope this person has protected themselves. Number 6. Faking it. This person tells a story about their mother. They said, my mom had this neighbor who pretended to be weak from cancer/chemo, so her landlord couldn't get mad at her for when the trash bins were full and the lawn was filthy. She even went as far as shaving her head and faking a limp, cane, and everything. Mom baked her some cookies and offered to take care of her bins and lawn, and another neighbor spilled about her scam. My mom, now enlightened about my neighbor's faking and tired of the trash blowing into our yard, called the landlord. Neighbor wasn't happy and would blast music at ungodly hours of the night, wee morning, to get back at my mom. Mom would get frustrated because she worked late and left early, filed a noise complaint with the police. The neighbor claims my mom, an old little Asian lady, punched her in the chest. The neighbor wants her arrested. Mom shows cops our security cam footage, no mom punching. Instead finds crazy neighbor kicking her daughter out in the middle of the night. The daughter is banging on her door and my mom comes out to check on the noise, tries to bring the hysterical girl inside, and the neighbor comes out and sprays her with a hose. Then the neighbor was taken away and the daughter was sent to live with dad. That honestly sounds like a happy ending for everyone involved. Number 5. Stealing farm animals. This user said, I live on a farm and we had one guy who was a real jerk. He was known to have definitely stolen sheep from us. In some cases, he had shorn the wool off of them, sold it, and returned the sheep, and sometimes ate the sheep, as we suspect. He demanded that we front the bill to fix the fence despite it being between our two properties and refusing to split the costs. He had a house on the property that he rented to his farmhand, and the farmhand found him in there one day, going through his things and telling him he wasn't allowed to leave the property under any circumstances while under his employ. The guy quit straight after that and wanted to work for us. We had another old neighbor who regularly would try and play chicken with us in the car, and once pointed a weapon at my dad after my dad questioned why he sent his friends to hunt on our property. One horrible neighbor is one thing, but having to deal with two, I can't imagine. Number 4. Terrorizing a neighborhood. This online user said, when I was in high school, there were a few disturbing occurrences in my neighborhood. A woman down the street who lived alone woke up one night to go to the bathroom and heard her TV on in the living room. She found a guy sitting on her couch watching the TV. She started screaming, obviously terrified, and the guy ran out of her house. Maybe a week later, there was a family with a young daughter. She woke up in the middle of the night with her bedsheets pulled down and a guy tickling her feet. Again, started screaming and the guy fled. Another week or so later, 3 houses down where an elderly couple lived, the husband woke up in the middle of the night to find a man standing over his bed and staring at his wife sleeping. Now they somehow figured out who it was and everyone in the neighborhood got a flyer with his picture. Behind us was a densely wooded area that stretches for a couple of miles in every direction. This guy had been literally living in those woods for upwards of a month in a tent. One night in the middle of all these incidents, we had our sliding glass door open with just the screen door behind it shut. We had a big backyard and it was pitch black back there at night. Our dog suddenly jolted up and started growling viciously. My father jumped up and put the floodlight on over the deck to see what was back there, but there was nothing. The next morning we were outside doing yard work and noticed the lock on our back gate was broken. It's very safe to assume that this guy had tried to get into our backyard house but was deterred by my dog's growling and barking. If I woke up to some man tickling my feet, I don't think I'd ever be able to sleep again. Ugh. I hope they were able to find and catch this man who did this because that would make me uneasy if I lived there. Number 3. Obsessed with my mom. This user said, my parents have a neighbor that is obsessed with my mom. It was innocent enough at first, he was just nice and they'd have small conversations. They became friendly and we would invite him over for barbecues and everything. Then he started to get creepy. Every single time my mom would take the dog out, he would appear outside and want to talk to her. He would find an excuse to come knock on our door every single day. He got the same haircut and grew the same goatee as my dad and started to dress like my dad. He then went and bought the exact same type of motorcycle as my dad. He then started showing up at my mom's work, bringing her lunch and flowers. That's when my dad had to confront him and it almost became physical, and he has mostly stayed away since. Excuse me? So weird. Number 2. Hates the dog. This story goes, we had a large fenced-in backyard. My dog wasn't terribly loud and she wasn't aggressive at all. She was just the size of a lab, and my neighbors, specifically the wife, thought that made her evil. They called the cops more than once, saying my dog was terrorizing the neighborhood. The cops came, met the dog, and we explained that she was always in her yard. They left saying just make sure she stays in the yard, and the neighbor called 2 more times to complain, and eventually they went and spoke to her about ludicrous complaints. Here is when she started taking matters into her own hands. We noticed our dog was getting sick a lot, like really sick. We took her to the vet, and the vet said we needed to stop feeding her human food that could be bad for dogs. We had no clue what she was talking about. We went back home and decided to keep a closer eye on her. Turns out our neighbor had been dumping all manners of vile things over our fence. Food scraps, mop water, and God knows what else. We went and finally spoke to her about this and she denied it. Finally, we caught her on video and made sure she saw us recording her. Later that night, the husband comes over and apologizes for his wife and begs us not to call the cops. He promises he'll ensure our dog is left alone. We agreed, but said if anything happened to our dog again, we would press charges. Thankfully, she stopped coming after our dog, and eventually she fell very ill and passed. Her husband was like a different person. He invited us over for barbecues and all, and eventually even got himself a little dog. Now, that is just evil. Messing with a poor dog, that's just wrong. And coming in at number 1 is crime scene. This online user said, my dad lives in an apartment and one day he came home to cops outside of his door. They asked him some questions about his neighbor across the hall. Just general stuff like have you noticed anything weird, etc. My dad told him no, he looks like a well put together 30-ish-year-old businessman. The cops go on to explain that a 30-year-old woman is missing and was last seen by a security camera walking into the building with this man. But they never had any footage of her, or him for that matter, leaving the apartment. The cops stayed outside and monitored the apartment until about 5 p.m. that night when they finally got a warrant. They noticed a shower curtain missing and golf clubs scattered on the bedroom floor. They end up arresting the guy, and fast forward 3 weeks and the cops find her body about 45 minutes south in the woods on the side of a bike trail. Then about 2 months ago they found more tapes as the investigators went back to look at them. They discovered the man leaving the apartment with his golf bag. But like I said earlier, all of his clubs were in his room. I'm sure many people have put 2 and 2 together. A full-size woman wouldn't fit in a golf bag, but that's how he got her out. Oh. I mean, hey, at least nothing bad happened to their dad, but that is just scary. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 horrifying real neighbors you wouldn't want to live next door to. Have you ever had horrible neighbors? I had a neighbor who once stole our recycling and organics bin and yelled at my roommates and I when we went to go get them back. But other than that, I've been lucky. Let us know your stories and thoughts in the comments down below, and hey, why not like and subscribe while you're down there? I'm your host Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.